Hi everyone, welcome to Rockstar Business World's interviews. I'm joined here in the Rockstar Hub today by the Honourable Lord Wei of Shoreditch. Sir, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. So, thank you firstly so much for giving up your time to come down here, and really looking forward to hearing the insights about business and of course your journey. So let's start first with the story of who was Nathaniel Wei, is now Lord Wei of Shoreditch, and incredibly successful in business. How did it all start, and also finish off by why do you feel it's important giving back to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, I mean, my journey into Parliament and what I do was very much an unintentional one. Had no idea that was all going to happen. I came out of Chinese family. My father immigrated here before I was born, and then after university ended up in a company called McKinsey doing consulting, particularly around technology. This is about 15 or so years ago, and was just had a great time flying around the world, helping different clients, getting very interested in the whole entrepreneurship sector, which was really, if you think about the kind of .com boom and bust and recovery, was kind of around about the time when I was working there, and then just had the opportunity after that, through their very kind offer to let me go and explore the world, do whatever I wanted to do, and then come back with or without an MBA. And that was kind of, for me, the chance, in a fairly risk-free way, I have to say, at the time, gave me the chance to actually go, okay, well, what's the riskiest thing possible? I mean, entrepreneurship is risky, but what's riskiest within entrepreneurship? Actually, at the time, social entrepreneurship was a big area. There's a lot of white space. There was already Bill Gates, there was already Steve Jobs, didn't know Mark Zuckerberg was on the way. But to be able to kind of make an impact and shape perhaps this new sector called social entrepreneurship was exciting to me. So I had the privilege to be able to join another colleague who'd gone, and we went and set up a charity called Teach First, which is now in 40 countries. And we ran it like a tech startup. It effectively, we raised a pretty huge chunk of money for a charity startup, and within 3 years it went national, and learned a lot along the way. And by then I got the bug. I did a bit of time in venture capital, but then after that it was a serial social entrepreneurship journey for me. Set up my own incubator, did some work as an advisor in different sort of fields, and then David Cameron, his team, got in touch with me. Saw that a number of things I'd been doing had scaled, social entrepreneurship that had scaled, which is actually quite rare. I mean, there are huge charities and there are lots of small ones, but the ones that kind of make the transition, there's not as many. So I got involved in some speech writing and then some policy, actually piloted what then became National Service now, which is a kind of huge program for 16 to 17-year-olds in the country. And then following that, he then invited me to the House of Lords, where then 5 years ago, when then I had the opportunity really to do a number of things, work on China, which is my background, and be involved in that whole scene, to continue the kind of whole social entrepreneurship focus. And because I'm Lord Wei of Shoreditch, inevitably I have an interest in creativity in cities, and obviously get to see and stand alongside and work with many of the entrepreneurs in Shoreditch and beyond, in Manchester and around the world, including in China. And I think what makes me want to give back, and when I worked as a venture capitalist, I always said that actually VC is a philanthropic activity. As a sector, as an industry, it doesn't always make money.
That's true.
So what you are doing is you're sowing into the next generation, you're sowing into people with the big ideas. And you think about Steve Jobs, we always think, Apple is on and off the biggest company in the world. He started off taking out time in an orchard, basically a kibbutz, and that's what gave him the idea for Apple. Having that time as a young person to figure out what he wanted to do in his life, and coming up with that philosophy of his, which is to make a dent in the world. And I really think if we can inspire the next generation to go, yeah, we can make money, we can IPO, that's fine. But also, what impact do we want to make in the world? What dent do we want to make? What change do we want to make in the world? And really, at the end of the day, for a good social entrepreneur, or a tech entrepreneur, or any other entrepreneur, if you have that same motivation and you enjoy the journey, you will go far, you will make that impact, large or small. And that's what I want to see.
Lord Wei, I want to start with the first step of any business journey, which is, of course, starting out. And many companies here in the UK and around the world start, but at the end of that first year, they're no longer around, and there are reasons for that. So in your experience, obviously with Teach First, that's been a huge success for you, even as a social entrepreneurship focused business. What advice can you give on your experience? If you're going to start a company well, what must you do?
Well, I actually say my sense is that this has changed in the last sort of 15 or so years. Back in
Absolutely.
the days of Teach First and many other, tech and other startups, your first step is to really do a business plan, which is still advisable to do.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the things I've been involved with, we spend anywhere between 3 and 6 months, 2 or 3 people intensively working up that plan, and where you, in the process of consulting, focus groups, talking to people in the industry that you're targeting, getting that wisdom, getting that insight into your plan. In that process, you're actually building support. So actually, I remember we would do focus groups with, say, Oxford graduates to ask them, what would make you want to give up one path for 2 years at least and become a teacher in an inner city school, and then go on to, McKinsey or Goldman or whatever career you want to do. And then in that process, you're actually helping them sell themselves, sell the idea to themselves, so that by the end of that period, you've got a bunch of people that you can immediately go to and say, how about it? Do you want to join the pilot in whichever capacity? That's still valid, but I think today it is in many ways cheaper to do a startup. Just in terms of, you can put a website up for almost nothing, whereas back then we had to spend a sizable chunk on the money that we raised, focusing on that. And you can pull in resources on the fly a bit more. So I think today it's about saying, okay, how do I live as an entrepreneur? How do I adopt the lifestyle as an entrepreneur? How do I cut my costs if I can? So that, and I've met people who've hacked ways to live on, say, in London for £8,000 a year, which gives you more of a runway to develop that plan and to research and to build that initial customer base before you officially launch. And I can't say I'm an expert in this, and I have a family and other constraints, but I see more and more people doing this. And even that 3-month period, there are opportunities now to go to Thailand and Phuket and other places with a bunch of friends, live really cheaply.
Yep.
And spend that time really focusing on what is the product, what is the kind of initial
Absolutely.
prototype, and I think that's a valid way too these days.
It is. It's kind of making it, because I know you've got 2 young kids, I've got 2 young kids. Grabbing all of our friends and living a year in Thailand, coming up with a business idea would be quite a hoop, but unfortunately probably past us at this stage.
Yeah, well, having said that, we actually homeschool our kids.
Yeah.
I know families who have done that, so.
Right.
It's not for everybody,
No.
But even with families, I think there are ways where you can work out, maybe, I've met families where one of the couple are working in a conventional job, but that frees up the other one to focus for a period of time on that entrepreneurial idea.
Definitely.
And I think that is one of the most important things, because if you run out of runway while you're waiting for investment to come in, that's it, it's game over,
Yep.
isn't it? So you've got to create that runway in those initial years.
Let's now talk about sales, because you very, very smartly said that times have changed now in terms of the ease and ability and the cost effectiveness of starting a business.
Yeah.
Now that it's started and you've got the website and you're haggling away in terms of keeping costs down, the business isn't going to last very long if you're not generating sales in. I think it's vital. And I think from an investment point of view that we're going to talk about later, most investors these days, they want to see traction, they want to see sales in the market first. So cost effectively in today's market, what's your advice on companies generating sales as quickly as they can?
Well, this is not rocket science really. I think the key is to find that first customer. And I remember in a number of the initiatives I've been involved with, when you do those focus groups or when you do those interviews, occasionally, well, if you do it enough, you will find that person whose profile fits your product or your service perfectly. And if you can work with them and elicit from them, what is that sales pitch? How are they selling to themselves the product or the service that you have put before them to evaluate? And in some cases, that person, or that if it's B2B, that leader of a business customer, actually then helps to link in all the others, those initial other customers. And if they stick with you, especially say for something like consulting, most consulting firms that go beyond the first 2 years have that anchor customer who's stuck with them.
Absolutely.
And you really focus on that customer. You build a relationship. They are effectively helping you to sell the product, and particularly in the age of social media. Say you're working with millennials or other customers, the peer-to-peer thing is so important. People don't just want to hear your pitch; they want to hear the pitch effectively of a satisfied customer or one or more. And so I think I would place a huge emphasis on that. And then of course, beyond that, there are techniques, there's things you can do in terms of internet marketing and so on. But still, the content is key. So if you've got satisfied customers that you can work with, they can help you generate that initial content.
So let's now talk about the follow-on from that first customer. As you said, what I'm really enjoying about this interview is that you are very lean and mean, right? And I think in a startup in today's market, you've got to get that done. Lean and mean startup, cost-effective way to get that first customer or customers. Now let's talk about the next stage, which I call marketing, which is when we now have to leverage off these tools to cost-effectively get more of these leads or more of these sales in. So just, it would be great to get your thoughts around marketing and what you think we should be doing now in today's market.
Yeah. Well, I think once you've started to identify that that kind of ideal customer and you start to observe their habits, there are simple things you can do. You know, what do they read? What websites do they visit? Who influences their buying choices? And of course, then you can input that into a more sophisticated strategy. You know, how do you get onto people's blogs, either by actually offering content to them or being part of the kind of retweeting process, and equally, you know, let's not always assume that people are only going to use social media. If your ideal customer is somebody who doesn't use the internet that often, then you've got to figure out, okay, where do they get their news? What influences their buying choices? And are there magazines, or is it TV, or is it, you know, literally door to door? And I think that increasingly we're finding that blended approach is very important. You know, our being drawn to the internet simultaneously creates a desire for people to go back to basics, to switch off, to be analog, to be away from all of that advertising. So by all means, do all of that if it's the right fit. But actually, if it's just saying, okay, we're going to market through groups of people coming together, say it's around a kind of book club type model, or the Avon lady kind of type model, that makes sense. If that makes sense, if that's what works, then pursue that and build a strategy around that.
Brand. Let's talk about branding. Very, very smartly, you said before, knowing who your customer is and knowing what influences their buying decisions. That's where we're talking about with marketing. And we get that right, we should see more and more customers coming through. And the more customers you start having, more sales you start to make, you're now at a stage where you can start considering that you're building a brand here. So the simple question is, Lord Wei, what does the term brand mean to you? And what do we need to be doing to be turning our businesses into a brand?
Well, I'm no branding expert, so I can only speak from my experiences.
Of course, please.
Obviously, the holy grail, isn't it, is to create a brand with a very strong emotional pull. So you think about Apple, you think about Uber today. The actual name doesn't necessarily link very directly to the product that they're selling. And I personally think that a lot of the branding in Nike, for example, happened after they were launched. So the moment when you pick on the emotional, you know, mega brand, if you like, is when you've got to the point where you can start to influence not just the head but the heart. So I can, you know, Apple computing, if you look at the very earliest, it's like a logo, it's a bit of color, and it's a computer. And that's really, but later on, obviously, they developed that. So that emotional side may come later, but you may want to create, as you think about your brand, something in your brand architecture which gives you that option later on to turn it into something very emotionally strong when you've got more traction in the marketplace. In the very early stages, what I've learned is you have to actually have two elements to your brand, or even two brands, but which one of them eventually emerges. One is simply, what is that phrase, or even the brand itself, that does what it says on the tin. So with Teach First, you know, we actually, when we did the focus groups, we had two options. We could call it Learning to Lead, which was going very well, which is great, but it didn't really tell you what you had to do. Or you had Teach First, which literally tells you, does what it says on the tin.
Absolutely.
Right? And we had other ones, Future Leaders, and a whole bunch of others, which are much more about, okay, if I sign up, I'm going to do this. But you found you also needed something which was much deeper, which like Learning to Lead, you know, for example. And so we ended, actually in the early years, we just had both. Teach First and a slogan, Learning to Lead, underneath. And that way, you both get clarity for people quickly on what is it that we're asking people to do, how do they step into the shop front, as it were. But we also said something about the process that they're going to go through by engaging with this product or this service. So if you do this, if you teach first, you will learn to lead. So it becomes a very compelling sort of narrative for people. So I think when you develop a brand, what is it that, if they know nothing about the product, What do you need to get in front of them that makes them think, okay, this is what I want you to do? And then what is it that if they do that, what's the benefit, right? And if you can combine the two in your brand, and it's going to be different for everybody, then instantly you're going to be able to communicate to people in a way that gets, cuts through, if you like. Increasingly people are skeptical about things like branding and marketing. But if you can just, on the one level, engage where it's just, this does what it says on the tin, and equally tell them what they're going to get out of it. And then you also some aspect of that, or some logo that sits alongside that, gives you the future thing, which is one day they'll come and sign up, frankly, without knowing what it is they have to do and not really knowing what benefit, but they're going to do it because everyone else is. And they're going to do it because something about the brand that you've created pulls them in, pulls in their heart.
Let's now talk about the team. Obviously, with Teach First, I'm guessing you didn't do it all by yourself, and it's impossible. If the focus is to grow a fast-growing business, a scalable business, you can't do it alone. And I think it's so vital to have the right team around you. And as the leader of that team, in your experience, what advice can you give about getting the best out of them?
Well, I have to be sort of clear. The CEO, Brett Wigdorf of Teach First, really was the guy that built the team and the teams that led to Teach First sort of getting to where I was very much the entrepreneur helping to set up each new aspect. And I think that is a lesson, really. Some of us entrepreneurs or others, we may or may not be the right person to set up the team. It may be that we need other people who can come and manage those teams, and we provide the vision or something else, right? So first of all, before you even go about setting up a team, figure out what it is, what kind of person are you? Are you a team person? If you're not, surround yourself with people who are team people. And there are entrepreneurs who have that style, who have that way. One of the things I learned about teamwork was actually before even I finished university, I was involved in a business course where we were split into different teams, and we were given this simulation challenge where you had to kind of feed into a computer, basically, and we were building factories and all kinds. It's a simulation. And my team was primarily composed of non-mathematicians or non-scientists. So we didn't have people in the team who could crack the code, right? So theoretically, you could crack the algorithm that was producing the simulation. We had none of those. So all we could do, and I led that team, was, okay, we have a limited time in which to give our best answer of what we needed to do. So we organized ourselves to turn around the decision as fast as we could. And in each time we fed the data in, we got the response back, we could analyze the data and go, okay, how do we adjust our decision-making process? And I think a lot of the times entrepreneurship is like that. You're not in an environment where it's ambiguous, where there's uncertainty. You're never going to have enough time to come up with the perfect solution. So what you need to do is organize your team to quickly come up with the best solution you can find for now, and fail fast and learn fast, and then try again.
Yeah,
keep doing that feedback loop. And I think ultimately that's what a good team is about. It's about how do you create that environment where we're vulnerable enough with each other that we can say, this is not working, I need to give you this feedback. Let's see how we can organize in this way. And if the leader of that team facilitates that, then ultimately you're going to be a successful team.
Absolutely. So a topic obviously that a lot of businesses watching this section now are keen to do, which is raise more investment, raise more capital for their businesses. Obviously you've been very successful in doing it for your own companies, but at the same time you are from the dark side, in the sense that you were, I say the dark side, I'm kidding. You worked within a VC for a number of years. So what do businesses in today's market, if they're going to have any chance of receiving, whether it be VC, crowdfunding, private equity, angel investment, bank of mum and dad, or one of the high street banks, what do they need to be doing?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things to think about is, before you go and raise external finance, figure out what you want to do and whether you actually need a lot of it. So sometimes I meet entrepreneurs and the assumption is, I am going to raise X rounds and then we're going to IPO, and they're in a huge rush, okay? And equally, I say to people, ideally you want to get to the end of the process and still own enough of the business to have a say. If you're really going to build a great business, if you think about, I'm really into social reform. I greatly admire people like Sped and Lewis, who founded John Lewis, Cadbury, and there are businesses today that kind of really follow amazing ethical principles. Some of them are owned by their employees. You can't do any of that unless you own the business. You can't do Google moonshots unless you have majority control over the business, right? So that's very, very important to not actually go into with a mindset that I'm going to sell most of my business before it gets anyway. Actually think, I'm going to try and preserve as much of the equity as possible. Now, I know some successful angels and entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, who have said, okay, how can I make a business that's generating cash so fast, so quickly, that if I have to go to external finance, I can get a good price for it. Or I don't even have to go to external finance. I've known people who say, do app development, and their business would generate cash by doing consulting for companies that needed apps developed, particularly corporates, for example. And that generated a cash cow. And then when they realized through using some of that money and doing a bit of R&D what their app product was, they then turned that consulting company effectively to an app company. And then they moved out the consulting often into the next business. But that allowed them to actually get to a certain scale, get to certain success. That then when they brought in the investment, often they could jump almost straight to pre-IPO and IPO, where still nonetheless they could retain control of the company and have that equity. So I think that's very important to kind of really understand, if you really want to build a great business long term that you can have influence in still, actually don't just package it up. Don't just slice and dice it like a subprime mortgage to be sold on. Create some real value. Try and generate cash early. Find investors who understand that and who can allow you to still have a long-term say as a founder. And because it's a long game, in this market today, my sense is that it's not always that difficult to raise the first 50, 100K. Your real challenge is going to be going to VC or others for the 2 million, 3 million mark. And if you can create an engine that can allow you to go more on your own terms rather than on theirs, then that's the best position to be in.
Let's talk now, and you've done this with one of your companies, Teach First. It's now in 40 countries now, you mentioned, and so I know you've obviously helped that business significantly in getting it out there. The people who are watching this area now, it's because they themselves have that desire, that goal. What tips can you give our users now if they're here in the UK or they're currently in China or the US or Australia, and their desire is to get that product or service to other countries? What would you say?
Yeah. Well, again, I can't take all the credit for Teach First's internationalization. I was there right at the beginning, and there are others who took that forward. But I think internationalization, there are different paths that you can take, depending on your product and your service. And frankly, depending on how much travel you want to do, because it's tough, it's hard work. And I know some people who've basically said, okay, well, we're just going to give our product away for free internationally. And if people want to pay to learn about our products, they can come to us, or we can do it online. And that's one valid model, particularly, frankly, if you don't want to do a lot of traveling and your product is amenable to that. So think about Linux, for example. I'm sure the founders of Linux do a lot of flying, but their model actually lends itself to spreading virally and finding ways to generate income more closer to home. Obviously, if you then want to have more of an input into how that expansion takes place in your product, particularly physical goods or things that involve shop fronts and so on, needs that more hands-on approach, then you can either do distribution, to find great partners in places like China or around the world, and finding that partner is really tough. It could take years, but it's worth the wait, right? Or you can franchise and license, like a McDonald's and there's a lot of good stuff in that around how you can license and franchise your model. And most of the effort is creating a product that's codified and licensable, franchisable. So not internationalizing necessarily too fast, right? And finding good people who can take on that country or other franchise, you can then run it. If ultimately you still feel you need to do the kind of more holding company and international branch type model, then ultimately I would say that the key is finding the employees, both in country and at headquarters, and board members who understand that culture. Because it's a real minefield wherever you go, whether you're going east or whether you're coming from east to west. You've got to find local people at the senior level who can bring in insight to your board and bring their connections and investment. But you also got to find the right leaders in each country.
And what about partners as well? So, like, rather than from day one, if I was wanting to set up in China, rather than what would your thoughts be on versus paying for an employed director and building a board there to start with a trusted partnership who has a network, has a database already, that, you know, as long as the deal's right and it makes sense for everyone, as another route as well?
Absolutely. Well, the ideal, of course, is to find a customer who is so excited about the product, but has access to or has investment, has connections, has a database, because they can then sell it in a culturally relevant way to that country and that culture and that network.
So, Lord Wei, this is my last question for you, and again, thank you so much for giving up your time to be here today. This question is about the exit, about whether it's an IPO or selling to a private entity, to a VC, another group, a competitor. Some of us who are watching this now, that's the goal, that's the dream one day, to be able to exit with a figure or a number that one would be happy with. If you're going to achieve that, what must businesses be doing now in order to get that goal done?
Well, you know, fundamentally, ultimately, if you are going to exit a business, you need to have something of value to sell to the markets. There is a way, of course, in bubbles and in hot markets to package it up and to be in a hot sector and to get amazing valuation. But I think, you know, the goal, in my view, of every good entrepreneur should be, how profitable is this business? How could it expand into markets and create a genuine story? That means for the investor coming in, they're buying into something of true value. That's the basic thing. I think, you know, others can talk about the specific detail around that, but what I can perhaps say in addition is the founding team, in my view, really need to think through exit. If you come into tech or other entrepreneurship just purely because you want to do a kind of fabulous IPO and retire somewhere in the south of France or something, just think that through, because I have known a number of entrepreneurs and I've observed a number where, if you really think about it, the exit process is a very emotional journey. Okay, you're selling your baby that you've worked on for a number of years to someone else who may or may not look after it very well. You are instantly, if it goes well, becoming very, very rich, which brings up its own challenges, psychologically and otherwise. And some people actually really struggle with that process because two things are happening. One is you're having to deal with what I call founder syndrome. So, and I've had to learn over the years, when should I be out of this business, right? Whether or not there's a financial gain or not. How can value be created for this business if someone else is leading it? Because I don't have the skills for that next phase. It's something I've had to think through, and I'm at peace with that. And I know some great entrepreneurs in the Valley and elsewhere. Their career is to start things up and then hand over to the next person. And in a way, that's even more important than realizing the valuation, because then that thing you've created value in can last. Who wants to create businesses ultimately that IPO or you exit and then only, within months of leaving, die? Succession is key. But then you've got to figure out, okay, let's say you've made a lot of money. What do you do with your time? You've had this activity that's given you a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. What do you do? And I've met, famously, the founder of Minecraft sold that business to, I think, Microsoft. And recently he's been blogging about, got nothing to do. He's living the life, got this house, and what can he do? And actually, that can be so traumatic, that process of going, the thing I spent so many years of my life building, I no longer have to occupy my time.
Yeah.
So actually think through, if you are going to exit, don't just think, okay, when I've sold, I'll think about what I'm going to do. Start thinking now, before you exit, what is the next step? How can I take it further? If I had that money, what would I do? Do I invest it in other businesses? Do I become a mentor? Do I do social impact? Try and have that in mind. Otherwise, you will find that once you've achieved your goal, you've lost more than you've gained in reality.
Absolutely. And I think the final point on that too is that often if you enter that business thinking that I've got a 5-year plan, I'm going to IPO it, often it doesn't happen, because often, that's a very, very sensible answer, and it's something that I think people watching this are really going to think about, because I've asked that question to a number of people who have sat where you've sat, and It's amazing. All the ones who have achieved it, they said, don't even think about it. Because if you build a strong, profitable company, right, that has a strong traction in the market, that is scalable, believe me, my friends, the phone will ring.
Yeah.
And but it's very important to say that, you know, do you want that? Is it a case of sitting in the south of France, or make sure you've got something else to occupy your time?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Lord Wei of Shoreditch, thank you so much.
Thank
Great
you.
answers, great interview, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Please do have a look at Lord Wei's profile. It gives great insights to the businesses that he is involved with, and make sure to check out Teach First as well. Thanks again.